The first time my daughter suggested a nursing home, she didn't say the words. She said she was worried. Looking back now, I realized that was how everything began. Not with an argument, not with a diagnosis, not even with my fall. It began with concern that sounded so sincere I never thought to question it. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm 74 years old, and until last spring, I'd spent the last 46 years living in the same little white house just outside Columbus, Ohio. My husband Michael and I bought it when we were both too young to know what we were doing and too hopeful to believe anything could ever go wrong. We painted every room ourselves. We planted the maple tree in the front yard the year our daughter, Lisa, turned 5. Michael built the back porch with his own hands after spending nearly every Saturday that summer, measuring, cutting, and starting over whenever something wasn't perfectly straight. That house wasn't just where I lived. It was where my life happened. Every floorboard carried a memory. Every window had watched a different version of our family grow older together. After Michael passed away 8 years earlier, people kept asking whether I planned to move somewhere smaller. They meant well. Living alone at my age made some people uncomfortable. It never made me uncomfortable. I still drove myself to church every Sunday. I volunteered twice a week at the public library, reading to children who reminded me why I'd loved teaching second grade for more than 30 years. I baked pies for neighbors when someone got sick. I kept my little vegetable garden alive every summer. And every morning before making coffee, I watered the roses Michael had planted along the front fence. He used to joke that roses were like marriage. If you ignore them, he'd tell me with a grin, they'll remind you. I still laughed every time I thought about it. The accident happened on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day no one remembers until it changes everything. I'd just finished trimming the rose bushes after breakfast. The grass was still damp from the night's rain. I reached a little farther than I should have to clip one stubborn branch. My foot slipped. Before I knew it, I was sitting on the ground with a sharp ache running through my hip. It hurt more from surprise than anything else. Old bones don't bounce the way they used to. Fortunately, my neighbor Frank happened to be walking his dog across the street. Within minutes, he was helping me into his truck and insisting we go to the emergency room. "I'll call Lisa," he said gently. I told him not to make a fuss. "It isn't that bad," he smiled. "That's exactly what people say before finding out it is." 2 hours later, after x-rays, blood tests, and what felt like enough waiting to last a lifetime, the emergency physician walked back into my room carrying a clipboard. "Mrs. Brooks," he said with a warm smile, "nothing's broken." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "You've got some bruising and a mild sprain. Take it easy for a couple of weeks. Maybe let someone help with the heavy gardening." "That's all?" He nodded. "You've been lucky." Then he looked at Lisa. "She's doing remarkably well for someone her age." Those words should have ended the conversation. Instead, they started another one. Lisa thanked the doctor, but I noticed something strange. She wasn't relieved. She looked frustrated. On the drive home, she barely spoke. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Finally, she sighed. "Mom, what if next time nobody finds you?" I looked out the passenger window. "There won't be a next time." "You don't know that." "I've lived alone for 8 years." "I know. I've been fine." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she kept driving until we reached my driveway. She turned off the engine but didn't unlock the doors. That was when she looked at me with tears already forming in her eyes. "I almost lost you today." Her voice cracked. "I can't stop thinking about what could have happened." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm still here." "But what if next time you're not?" It was the first time I'd ever seen fear overpower reason in my daughter, or at least that's what I believed then. Over the following week, she called constantly. Every morning, every evening, sometimes twice in between. Had I eaten? Was I dizzy? Did I remember to lock the doors? Had I taken my vitamins? At first, it felt sweet. Then it became exhausting. One Friday afternoon, she arrived carrying grocery bags I hadn't asked for. She stocked my refrigerator without saying much. Then she sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking." Whenever someone begins a sentence that way, something difficult usually follows. "What about?" "I think you should stay somewhere people can keep an eye on you." I laughed softly. "You mean with you?" She hesitated. "Not exactly." My smile disappeared. "Lisa." It wouldn't be forever. I stared at her. You mean a nursing home? It's a beautiful place. I don't need one. It's only temporary. I'm perfectly capable of living here. You fell. I slipped. You could have died. I bruised my hip. She leaned forward, her eyes filling with tears again. Mom, why are you making this so hard? I blinked, because somehow, without noticing exactly when it happened, the conversation had shifted. I was no longer explaining why I wanted to stay in my own home. I was defending myself against a decision I hadn't made. For 3 days, she kept returning, sometimes alone, sometimes with brochures, sometimes with stories about friends whose parents had waited too long. Finally, she said the sentence that broke my resistance. Please, just for a couple of weeks, do it for me. Not because you need it, because I'll sleep better knowing you're safe. Every parent knows that look, the one your child gives you when they're asking for reassurance. I spent my whole life trying to protect Lisa from worry, even now, especially now. So I agreed. I'll try it. Her shoulders relaxed instantly. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Thank you. You'll see. This is the right decision. The following Monday, she packed 2 small suitcases. I told myself there was no reason to take more. After all, I'd be home before long. As we were leaving, Lisa paused by the front door. Mom? Yes? I should probably keep your house keys while you're gone. I frowned. Why? So I can check the mail, water the plants, make sure everything's okay. It sounded reasonable. I handed them over. A few minutes later, she asked another question. Where do you keep the spare key? Without thinking, I told her. Then she asked where I kept my insurance papers, my checkbook, my file cabinet. Each question seemed harmless on its own. Together. They should have terrified me. I simply didn't know it yet. When we pulled into the nursing home's parking lot, the building looked clean, quiet, almost welcoming. The receptionist smiled kindly. Residents played cards near the windows. Someone was practicing piano somewhere down the hall. Lisa carried my suitcase inside. I'll visit every day, she promised. I smiled. I know you will. She kissed my forehead before walking toward the exit. I watched her leave. She waved one last time through the glass doors. I waved back. I truly believed I'd be going home soon. 3 days later, I picked up the phone in my room to call my house, instead of hearing it ring. I heard a recording. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. That was the moment something deep inside me whispered the thought I wasn't ready to believe. Maybe. I wasn't coming home after all. People imagine nursing homes as quiet places. They're wrong. They're full of sounds you don't notice until you're living inside them. Wheelchairs rolling across polished floors, televisions playing too loudly in rooms where no one was really watching, medication carts squeaking down the hallway every morning at exactly 8, someone coughing behind a closed door, someone crying softly after sunset, and every so often, someone waiting by the front window, hoping today would be the day their family remembered to visit. I told myself I wasn't one of those people. I was only staying for a couple of weeks. That was the agreement. Every morning I'd make my bed before breakfast, straighten the few clothes hanging in my closet, and mentally count the days until I could go home. The first afternoon, I unpacked the framed photograph of Michael and placed it on the bedside table. He was smiling the way he always had whenever someone pointed a camera at him, half amused, half embarrassed. You'll only have to look at this place for a little while, I whispered to his picture. I'll be home before the roses bloom again. I believed it. At least then. The staff couldn't have been kinder. Nurse Angela introduced herself during my first evening. She looked to be in her early 40s, with warm brown eyes that somehow made every conversation feel unhurried. If you need anything, she said, just press the call button. I won't be here long, I answered with a smile. She smiled back politely. I hear that a lot. I didn't understand what she meant until later. Breakfast was served at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 5. The days moved with such rigid precision that after only 4 days, I could tell the time without looking at a clock. Many residents slept through activities. Others wandered the hallways without destination. Some repeated the same stories over and over, as though each telling kept a memory alive just a little longer. I listened. Sometimes they simply needed someone willing to hear them again. Mrs. Donnelly had once owned a flower shop. Mr. Harper had flown helicopters during Vietnam. Evelyn still carried photographs of a husband who died nearly 15 years earlier. No one stopped loving just because they grew old. If anything, love became heavier with time. After a week, the activity director asked whether I'd consider helping with the afternoon reading group. Old habits never truly disappear. I found myself sitting beside residents with worn paperback novels, reading aloud exactly as I'd once read to second graders decades before. People smiled, they laughed. Some even remembered parts of the stories before I reached them. For an hour each afternoon, the building almost felt alive again. One morning, Nurse Angela watched me finish a crossword puzzle before breakfast. "You know," she said carefully, "you're probably the most independent resident we have." I laughed. I've always liked doing things myself. She hesitated. Then she asked quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Did you choose to come here?" The question caught me off guard. I stopped. Until that moment, I'd never actually considered how my arrival must have looked to everyone else. "I had a fall," I finally answered. "My daughter thought I'd be safer here for a little while." Angela nodded slowly. "But was it your decision?" I looked toward the dining room windows. Outside, spring sunlight warmed the flower beds. "I suppose." I agreed. Her expression remained thoughtful. She didn't argue. She simply squeezed my shoulder before walking away. But her question stayed with me all day. Did I choose this? Or had I simply stopped saying no? Lisa visited that Saturday. She stayed exactly 22 minutes. Not that I counted. At least, not intentionally. She brought me a new cardigan, asked whether I was sleeping well, mentioned she was terribly busy at work. Every time I tried talking about home, she changed the subject. "How are my roses?" "They're fine." "Did you open the kitchen windows while the weather was nice?" "I've been meaning to." "Did the mail arrive?" "Oh, just bills." Nothing she said sounded wrong, yet somehow, none of it felt right. When she stood to leave, I hugged her. "Next week?" "I'll try, Mom. I've got so much going on." She kissed my cheek and hurried toward the parking lot without looking back. The following week, she canceled twice. Then she stopped answering my afternoon phone calls. When we did speak, every conversation ended the same way. "I'm sorry. I'm just really busy. You understand, don't you?" Of course I understood. I'd spent my entire life understanding everyone else's circumstances. That's what mothers do. One afternoon, I realized something odd. I hadn't received any mail in over a week. Not a bank statement, not a church newsletter, not even the gardening catalog that arrived every spring without fail. I mentioned it to the receptionist. She checked the front desk. Nothing today. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow came. Nothing. Then another tomorrow. Still nothing. It felt like the outside world had quietly forgotten where I was. A few days later, while sitting near the front entrance after lunch, I noticed a familiar pickup truck pulling into the parking lot. Frank. For a second, I almost cried from relief. He walked inside carrying a paper bag. "I brought those oatmeal cookies you like." "You didn't have to." "I know." He smiled. But Martha always said nobody should visit empty-handed. We talked about the neighborhood, the church picnic, the unusually warm spring. For several minutes, everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Then, his smile faded. He stared at the paper cup in his hands. "Eleanor, what is it?" He hesitated. I wasn't sure if I should tell you. My stomach tightened. "Tell me what?" He looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "I drove past your house yesterday." I smiled automatically. "How's everything looking?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath. "There's a real estate sign in your front yard." For a moment, I thought I'd misunderstood him. "A what?" "A for sale sign." The room seemed to fall strangely silent. That can't be right. I thought maybe you knew? I don't. I never agreed to sell my house. Frank swallowed. I've also seen people going in and out. Young couples. A realtor. Moving trucks. Each word landed harder than the last. "No," I whispered. "There must be some mistake." I wanted there to be. He reached into his jacket pocket and slowly slid a folded photograph across the table. "I took this yesterday." My hands trembled as I unfolded it. There it was, my white farmhouse, my porch, my maple tree, and planted squarely in the front yard. A bright red sign. For sale. At the bottom, in much smaller letters, were two words that made my chest tighten. Open house. I stared at the picture until the letters blurred. Finally, I looked up at Frank. My daughter told me I'd only be here for 2 weeks. He didn't know what to say. Neither did I, because for the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to consider a possibility that frightened me more than growing old. Maybe Lisa hadn't brought me here to protect me. Maybe she'd brought me here to get me out of the way. There are 2 kinds of heartbreak. The first comes when someone betrays you. The second comes when you finally accept that the betrayal was real. The photograph Frank placed in front of me haunted me for the rest of the afternoon. I must have looked at it 100 times, each time hoping I had somehow imagined it. Each time seeing the same red sign standing proudly in my front yard. The yard Michael and I had spent decades caring for. The porch where we'd watch thunderstorms roll across summer skies. The kitchen where Lisa had blown out birthday candles every year until she left for college. Someone was trying to sell all of it, without ever asking me. That evening, I barely touched my dinner. Nurse Angela noticed immediately. "You feeling all right?" I forced a smile. "I'm just tired." She sat beside me anyway. "You don't look tired. You look worried." I hesitated, then I slid the photograph across the table. She studied it quietly. "Is this your house?" I nodded. "My neighbor says it's for sale." Her eyes narrowed. "Did you list it?" "No." "Did you sign anything?" "I don't think so." She looked at me for several seconds before speaking. "I think you need to call your attorney." I almost laughed. "My attorney? My husband handled everything before he passed." She leaned forward. "Mrs. Brooks, you'd be surprised how often older adults are pressured into decisions they never intended to make. I've worked here 14 years. I've seen families fight over money. I've seen children disappear. I've also seen good families do extraordinary things. But when something feels wrong, you shouldn't ignore it." Her words settled heavily inside me. For the first time, I realized something. I had spent nearly my entire life avoiding conflict. If someone raised their voice, I lowered mine. If someone needed help, I gave it. If someone disappointed me, I usually found a way to forgive them. It had made me a good teacher, a dependable wife, a loving mother. But perhaps it had also made me too easy to trust. The following morning, I asked the receptionist for the number of Robert Gaines. Robert had been Michael's attorney for nearly 30 years. He'd written our wills, handled Michael's estate, helped us refinance the house decades earlier. When his secretary answered, I introduced myself. There was a brief silence. "Mrs. Brooks?" "Of course. Mr. Gaines will make time for you." The appointment was scheduled for the next afternoon. Since I couldn't drive, Frank immediately volunteered. "You don't even have to ask. I'll be here." The next day, as we drove across town, neither of us spoke very much. I watched familiar streets pass outside the truck window, my favorite bakery, the public library where I'd volunteered every Wednesday, the little diner where Michael and I used to eat breakfast after church. Everything looked exactly the same, except I no longer felt like I belonged in my own life. Robert met us personally at the office door. He looked older than I remembered. More gray hair, thicker glasses, but the kindness in his face hadn't changed. "Eleanor." He hugged me gently. "I'm so sorry we haven't seen each other under better circumstances." His office still smelled faintly of leather books and fresh coffee. For a few moments, we talked about Michael, about retirement, about how quickly the years seemed to disappear. Then I handed him the photograph. "I think my house is being sold." He frowned. "Did you decide to move?" "No." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Did you sign listing paperwork?" "No." "Did you authorize anyone else?" "I don't believe so." Robert opened a thick file cabinet. Within minutes, he pulled out copies of documents he'd prepared years earlier. He adjusted his glasses. "Let's start with your power of attorney." I remembered signing it after a minor surgery nearly 6 years earlier. Lisa had insisted someone should be able to pay bills if I was temporarily unable to do so. It had seemed sensible. Robert carefully read each page. Then he looked up. This document is extremely limited. What does that mean? It only allows temporary financial management during medical incapacity. It specifically prohibits transferring real estate. So if someone is trying to sell your home using this document, they have no legal authority. A strange mixture of relief and fear washed over me. So it can be stopped. If we act quickly? He immediately began making phone calls, first to the county recorder, then to the title company, then to the real estate brokerage. His calm voice never changed, but I noticed how quickly people started responding once they realized an attorney was involved. After nearly an hour, he hung up the final call. I've frozen the transaction. I exhaled, but the word landed like another stone. But what? The paperwork has already gone much further than it should have. How far? He turned the computer screen toward me. Photographs of my home appeared. Every room. The kitchen, the living room, our bedroom, Michael's workshop, professional listing photos. Someone had walked through my entire house. Someone had opened closets, moved furniture, taken measurements, invited strangers inside, without my permission. I covered my mouth. Robert continued scrolling. Then he stopped. His expression changed. What is it? Eleanor, I don't like this. He clicked another document. This property was advertised as owner approved. But that's impossible. I know. Silence filled the room. Finally, I whispered, My daughter did this. Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked one quiet question. Do you want me to investigate everything? I thought about Lisa learning to ride her bicycle, her high school graduation, the night Michael walked her down the aisle, the countless times I defended her, excused her, believed her. Then I looked back at the photographs of strangers standing inside my home. Yes. My voice surprised even me. I want to know everything. Over the next several days, Robert's office uncovered far more than either of us expected. Lisa hadn't simply listed the house. She had already accepted an offer. She had signed preliminary agreements. She had transferred utility accounts. She had even hired an estate company to inventory my belongings. My belongings, not hers, mine, as if I had already died. The final discovery hurt the most. Robert called me into his office 3 days later. He placed a folder on the desk. I think you should see this. Inside was a mortgage pre-approval letter. Not in my name, Lisa's. Attached to it was an email. Once Mom's house closes, we'll have enough for the down payment. There were no words after that. No explanation, no misunderstanding, no confusion. She hadn't been trying to protect me. She had been planning her future, using my past to pay for it. I stared out Robert's office window for a long time before finally speaking. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong as a mother. Robert remained silent. I thought maybe I'd become difficult. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe getting older simply made me a burden. A tear rolled slowly down my cheek. The truth was much simpler. I wasn't in her way. I looked down at the folder lying open on the desk. I was standing between her and my house. For the first time since all of this had begun, I stopped wondering how to fix my relationship with my daughter. Instead, I began wondering how to protect myself from her. The first thing I noticed when Lisa walked into the nursing home 6 days later wasn't the guilt on her face. It was the irritation. She wasn't there because she missed me. She was there because something had gone wrong. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She closed the door behind her, crossed her arms, and let out a long sigh. Mom, we need to talk. I looked up from the novel resting on my lap and quietly marked my place. I agree. She sat across from me without waiting to be invited. I got a call from the realtor. Her voice carried the kind of frustration people usually reserve for broken appliances or delayed flights. They said you've hired an attorney. I have. Why would you do that? For a moment, I simply looked at her. It amazed me that she could ask the question with such genuine confusion. Why wouldn't I? She leaned back in her chair. You've made this much harder than it needed to be. Harder. The word echoed inside my head. 46 years in one home. My husband's memories, every family Christmas, every birthday, every goodbye, reduced to an inconvenience. I folded my hands in my lap. My neighbor showed me the sign. Her eyes immediately shifted away. So that's how you found out. Found out what? She didn't answer. Instead, she rubbed her forehead. I was going to tell you. When? She hesitated. When everything was finished. I smiled sadly. So after strangers bought my home? It wasn't like that. Then explain it to me. For several seconds, the room remained silent. Outside my window, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder before flying away again. Life kept moving, even when families fell apart. Finally, Lisa spoke. You weren't coming back there. I blinked. I'm sorry. The house is too much for you. You can't take care of it anymore. I've been taking care of it for 8 years. You fell. I slipped. You could fall again. So could you. She looked away. That's different. No, it isn't. Another long silence settled between us. I realized something then. This wasn't really about my fall. If it had been, we would have been discussing handrails, a medical alert button, someone to mow the lawn. Instead, we were discussing selling my entire life. I reached into the drawer beside my bed and removed the photograph Frank had given me. Without saying a word, I placed it on the table between us. Lisa stared at it. I was trying to help. I nodded slowly. Help who? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I continued quietly. The attorney found the purchase agreement. She looked up. He found the utility transfers. Her breathing changed. He found the estate inventory. Now her face began losing color. Then I said the one thing she never expected. He also found the mortgage approval. The room became perfectly still. You are buying a bigger house. She said nothing. You plan to use the money from selling mine. Still nothing. You never intended for me to go home. She lowered her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't think you'd understand. I almost laughed. Try me. She looked exhausted, not from caring for me, from carrying a lie that had finally become too heavy. You know how hard things have been since the divorce? I know. I've been drowning. I know. The apartment's too small. I know. I've been working overtime. I know. Her voice suddenly became louder. I've done everything I could, and nothing ever changes. Tears filled her eyes. I was finally going to have a real home. I stared at my daughter. For the first time in weeks, she was telling me the truth. I thought, she swallowed hard, I thought the house would be mine eventually anyway. Eventually. Such an innocent word, except she'd decided that eventually meant now. You weren't using all that space. I only visited once a month. The repairs kept getting more expensive. You were alone. She wiped her face. It just made sense. I felt something inside me quietly settle. Not anger, not hatred, acceptance, because I finally understood. This hadn't happened overnight. It had grown slowly, little justifications, little compromises, little lies she told herself until they became her truth. You know what hurts the most? I asked softly. She shook her head. It isn't that you wanted the house. It isn't even that you lied. She looked at me through tear-filled eyes. It's that you decided my life was already over. Her shoulders dropped. You packed my clothes. You disconnected my phone. You let strangers walk through my bedroom. You sorted through your father's tools. You erased me. While I was still alive. She covered her mouth and began crying. Real crying. Not the careful tears she'd shown after my fall. These came from somewhere much deeper. I'm sorry. The words came out broken. I'm so sorry. I believed she meant them, but some apologies arrived too late. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. For a brief moment, we were simply a mother and daughter again. I loved you before you were born. I loved you every single day after. I would have helped you. If you had needed money, I would have found a way. You only had to ask. She sobbed harder. I was ashamed. So instead, you chose deception. She nodded. I kept telling myself I'd explain later. But later never came. No, it didn't. She looked at me with the frightened eyes of a little girl I'd once comforted after nightmares. "Are you ever going to forgive me?" I took a long breath before answering. "I don't know." The honesty seemed to surprise both of us. "I hope one day I can." But forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. She closed her eyes. "You didn't lose my house today," I said quietly. "You lost something much more valuable. My trust." Neither of us spoke again for several minutes. When Lisa finally stood to leave, she looked years older than when she'd walked into the room. At the door, she stopped. "I never wanted to hurt you." I looked toward the window where the afternoon sunlight spilled across the floor. "I believe that." She turned back, hope flickering across her face. Then I finished my sentence. "But wanting something, and choosing it anyway, are two very different things." Lisa lowered her head. Without another word, she opened the door and walked out. I watched her disappear down the hallway until she was gone. Only then did I allow myself to cry. Not because I'd lost my daughter, but because I finally accepted that the little girl I'd raised had disappeared long before she ever took my house keys. For most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant putting my child first, even after she became an adult, even after she had a family of her own, even after she stopped needing me. I had always found excuses for Lisa. When she forgot birthdays, I told myself she was busy. When weeks passed without a phone call, I reminded myself she worked long hours. When she canceled dinner at the last minute, I convinced myself adulthood was simply complicated. Love has a strange way of protecting us from painful truths. Sometimes, it protects us for far too long. 2 days after Lisa's visit, Robert Gaines came to see me at the nursing home. He carried a thick folder under one arm and 2 cups of coffee in the other. I figured hospital coffee isn't much to brag about. I smiled. "It isn't." He handed me one of the cups before taking a seat. "I've got good news." I hadn't heard those words in what felt like months. "The court granted our emergency injunction." "What does that mean?" "It means your house isn't going anywhere." A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying slowly lifted from my shoulders. "The sale has officially been canceled. No one can purchase your property. The title has been frozen. The listing has been removed." I closed my eyes for a moment. Home. It was still mine. Robert continued. "The realtor has also withdrawn from representing Lisa. He says he was never told your authorization was limited." "So he didn't know?" Robert shook his head. "No. He believed everything had been done legally." I nodded. There had been victims in this story besides me, people who trusted what they'd been told, just as I had. "And Lisa?" I finally asked. Robert opened the folder. "She'll likely face civil consequences. The buyers are demanding reimbursement for inspection costs. The moving company wants payment. The realtor has filed a complaint. The title company has reported the unauthorized documents." I listened quietly. Months earlier, hearing all of this might have broken my heart. Now, I simply felt tired. "I don't want revenge." Robert looked at me thoughtfully. "I know. I just want my life back." He smiled gently. "And that's exactly what we're going to do." A week later, Robert drove me back to my house, not to move in, just to inspect it. I wasn't prepared for how emotional that drive would be. The closer we got, the quieter I became. When the familiar white farmhouse finally appeared at the end of the road, tears immediately filled my eyes. The maple tree still stood proudly in the front yard. The porch swing Michael had built was still hanging. The roses, they needed water, but they were alive. Robert parked the car. "You ready?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Walking through my own front door felt strangely unfamiliar. The house smelled different. Empty, as though it had been holding its breath. Several rooms had already been partially packed, books removed from shelves, kitchen cabinets labeled with sticky notes. My bedroom closet stood half empty. Someone had wrapped my wedding china in newspaper. I slowly walked into Michael's workshop. His old hammer still rested on the workbench exactly where he'd left it before cancer stole the strength from his hands. I picked it up, ran my fingers across the worn wooden handle, and finally cried. Not loud, not dramatically, just quietly. The kind of tears that come when grief and relief arrive together. Robert waited outside without interrupting. When I finally joined him on the porch, he simply asked, "What would Michael tell you right now?" I smiled through my tears. He'd tell me to stop apologizing for protecting what's mine. That sounded exactly like my husband. Over the next month, my attorney helped me put every piece of my life back together. My utilities were restored. My phone number was reactivated. My bank accounts were secured. Every legal authorization I'd ever given Lisa was revoked. Robert then placed a new set of documents in front of me. "Your will." I stared at it for a long moment. For years, there had never been any question. Everything would eventually belong to Lisa. That was simply what parents did. Robert didn't rush me. "What would you like to do?" I looked around my living room, at Michael's photograph, the quilt my grandmother had sewn, the bookshelf filled with children's stories I'd read hundreds of times. Then, something unexpected came to mind. During my weeks in the nursing home, I'd met women who hadn't been as fortunate as I was, women who truly had nowhere to return. Some had been manipulated, some abandoned, some forgotten. One woman had lost her home after her grandson emptied her savings. Another had signed papers she couldn't even read without her glasses. One had no family left at all. I thought about all of them. Then I looked back at Robert. "I don't want this house to end with me." He smiled. "What do you have in mind?" "I wanted to keep protecting people." Over the following weeks, we worked together to create something entirely new. After my lifetime, my home would become the Michael and Eleanor Brooks House, a non-profit residence for senior women recovering from financial abuse, housing fraud, or family abandonment. Not a nursing home, a home, a place where women could rebuild their lives with dignity. The bedrooms where my family had once slept would one day shelter women who had nowhere else to go. Michael's workshop would become a community craft room. Our dining room would host shared meals instead of lonely silence. My home would continue doing what it had always done, taking care of people. Robert looked over the final documents. "I think Michael would have been proud." "So do I." Then came the hardest decision of all. "What about Lisa?" he asked quietly. I had thought about that question every night. I don't want to punish her forever, but I can't reward what she did. We added one final provision. Lisa would no longer inherit the house. She would receive several personal keepsakes, family photographs, Michael's wedding ring, his military medals, letters I'd written throughout her childhood. Things money could never replace, along with one final envelope, handwritten, to be opened only after I was gone. Robert looked at me. "Are you sure?" I nodded. She spent months believing this house was the most valuable thing I owned. I looked around the living room one more time. I want her to discover that she was wrong. Because the most valuable thing I had was never this house. It had always been my love. And that, she had almost thrown away forever. People often imagine justice as something dramatic. A courtroom, a judge's gavel, someone being led away in handcuffs. Life rarely works that way. Sometimes justice is much quieter. Sometimes it looks like waking up in your own bed again. 6 months after everything began, I finally unlocked my front door with a key that had never left my own pocket. The house greeted me with a silence I hadn't realized I'd missed. Not the lonely silence I'd feared while living alone after Michael died. A peaceful silence. The kind that belongs only to places where love has lived for a very long time. I stood in the entryway without moving. Morning sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, just as it had every day for more than 30 years. The air still carried the faint scent of cedar from Michael's workshop. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Frank helped carry in the last few boxes. He looked around the living room and smiled. "It feels right seeing you back here." "It feels right being back." He placed the final box on the dining room table. "You know, a lot of people around town were worried about you." "I know. They're happy you came home." "So am I." Before leaving, he walked onto the front porch. "You've got visitors." I looked outside. 3 neighbors were walking up the driveway carrying casseroles, flowers, and homemade bread. Exactly the way people had welcomed us when Michael and I first moved into this neighborhood nearly half a century earlier. Mrs. Jenkins hugged me first. "We've missed seeing you water those roses every morning." Mr. Collins laughed. "They looked lonely without you." For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I laughed too, a real laugh, not one forced out of politeness, the kind that starts somewhere deep inside your chest. That afternoon, after everyone had gone home, I stepped into the backyard. The roses were blooming again. Not perfectly. Several bushes still showed signs of neglect. A few branches had withered. Others had grown wild. I picked up my gardening gloves. Slowly, patiently. I began trimming away what could no longer bloom. As I worked, I found myself thinking about people, about families, about forgiveness. Sometimes healing isn't bringing everything back to the way it was. Sometimes healing means accepting that certain things have changed forever, and choosing to grow anyway. A month later, construction crews arrived, not to renovate the house for sale, but to prepare it for its future purpose. The upstairs guest rooms were updated to become comfortable private suites. Michael's old workshop was transformed into a woodworking studio. The sunroom became a small library. The dining room received a long wooden table where strangers would one day become friends. When people asked why I was giving away something so valuable, I always answered the same way. I'm not giving it away. I'm giving it purpose. The Michael and Eleanor Brooks house officially opened the following spring. I was there the morning our first resident arrived. Her name was Ruth. She was 78 years old. Her grandson had convinced her to transfer ownership of her condominium after promising to take care of her. 2 weeks later, he sold it. She arrived carrying only 2 small suitcases. She looked exactly the way I had looked months earlier. Confused, embarrassed, heartbroken. I walked to the front door before anyone else could. "Welcome home," I said. She looked at me, surprised. "I don't want to be a burden." I smiled gently. "Neither did I." She started crying. So did I. Because in that moment, I understood something I never had before. Sometimes our deepest wounds become the very place where someone else begins to heal. People often ask about Lisa, whether we ever spoke again. The answer is yes. About a year after everything happened, she knocked on my front door without calling first. She looked different, older somehow, not because of time, because regret changes a person's face. She stood on the porch holding no paperwork, no excuses, no expectations, just a small cardboard box. I found these while cleaning my apartment. Inside were old family photographs, Michael teaching her to ride a bicycle, Christmas mornings, camping trips, school plays, pictures I'd thought were gone forever. I should have brought them back sooner. I invited her inside. We drank coffee in the kitchen. The same kitchen where she'd once learned to bake chocolate chip cookies standing on a little wooden stool. For nearly an hour, we barely spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've gone to counseling." I looked up. "I've spent months trying to understand how I became the person who could do what I did." She wiped away a tear. "I kept blaming money, my divorce, my stress. But none of those things made my decisions. I did. There it was. No excuses, no one else to blame, just the truth. I'm not asking you to trust me again," she said quietly. "I know I haven't earned that. I just wanted you to know. I'm trying to become someone Dad would have been proud of." I looked at my daughter for a long time, then I reached across the table and took her hand. "I believe people can change." She looked at me hopefully. "But change takes time." She nodded. "I know." And for the first time in a very long while, neither of us pretended that healing was simple. Today I'm 76 years old. Every morning I still water my roses before making coffee. Some afternoons I help new residents settle into the house. Sometimes we sit together on the porch without saying much. Because people who have survived betrayal don't always need advice. Sometimes they just need someone who understands the silence. When visitors ask whose house this used to be, I smile. It still is. Just in a different way. I used to believe that home was something another person could take away from me. I was wrong. Home was never the walls, never the deed, never the address. Home was every lesson Michael and I built together, every act of kindness, every memory rooted in love instead of fear. No one could steal those. Not my daughter, not betrayal, not time itself. If this journey taught me anything, it's this. Growing older doesn't make you powerless. Loving your children doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. And forgiveness doesn't always mean giving someone back the keys to your life. Sometimes forgiveness simply means laying down the anger while keeping the wisdom. Every morning, as I water Michael's roses, I remember something he used to tell me whenever we planted a new bush. Flowers bloom again because they were never afraid of winter. Now I know. People can bloom again too.